Well, my father actually was a real sort of pioneer in television through making television commercials. So in the 1970s, he was actually running creative for Y&R, Young and Rubicon. So if you watch Mad Men, that is essentially, that was my dad. And as an African American at the time, he was the only one out there who had major accounts actually running the television commercials, doing major print campaigns, etc. So we kind of grew up around design and around media. Milton Glaser, who designed the Brooklyn Brewery logo, his books, his graphic design books were coffee table books in my house. So visual arts was definitely something that we grew up with. When I went into school, I wasn't sure certainly that I wanted to follow that, but I was stage managing bands, I was doing all sorts of things when I was there, and I certainly thought I wanted to get into film as opposed to advertising. But as I was coming out of school, I was looking at it, I'm like, well, I realized that my degree in broadcasting and film qualified me to drive any colored cab that I wanted, so I came up with an idea that since I had spent all my parents' money, it would be better if I was going to be unemployed that they did not see me, so I left the country so that they wouldn't see me anymore and they could say, oh, Garrett's gone to England, don't you know? He's very important over there, he's got so much to do, So I vanished and I spent a year in London. And I was stage managing bands over there, but at the same time, I was going to the pub. And at the pub there, they had a form of beer which I'd never even heard of before, which is called cask conditioned beer. It's what Americans tend to think of as warm and flat, but in fact, it's just lightly carbonated. It's naturally carbonated. It's served warmer, but not warm, and it's got tons of flavor to it. So I drank beer when I was in college. We were college students. We drank everything we could and wherever we could find it as cheaply as possible. But there wasn't really any beer in the United States that was worth drinking. It had been turned into this sort of fizzy yellow water, which is still what most Americans are used to. But, especially in the United States, we had 4,000 breweries back in 1900. They made every kind of beer from all over the world. Here in Brooklyn, we had 48 breweries. They made 10% of all the beer in the United States in 1900. So just like our food community, our beer community was the most vibrant in the world because we're a nation of immigrants. We had brought everybody here. We had spoken their languages. We ate their food. We brewed their beer, and we did everything. And over 30 or 40 years, from say the 40s through the 60s, just like with food, we lost everything. Everything. We used to have all the great kinds of bread. Now we have one kind of bread. We used to have all these nice types of cheese. Now we have one kind of cheese, or maybe two. Kraft slices and Cracker Barrel. And that was pretty much, if you were in an Italian neighborhood, maybe you got some mozzarella, and that was about it. So this re-establishment that you see of all this food coming back, craft beer is part of that. And I kind of fell in love with it living in England, then traveling around Europe, and I got back in 1984, and I was like, well, where's ours? I mean, we still had the fizzy yellow liquid. I had had all this wonderful stuff, and I was like, okay, I can't drink this stuff anymore. And my best friend got me a home brewing kit for Christmas so I could stop complaining and make my own beer, if the stuff here was so bad. And so I did. And I started to enjoy it. I started to get good at it. And in 1989, I actually decided to leave a pretty cushy job and go work for a brewery called Manhattan Brewing Company that was in Soho at the time. Yeah, well, I mean, I think society learned to brew beer from Africa, everywhere. It got refined going into the Middle East, into Egypt, into Samaria, and then moved from there, through Greece. When Greece took over Egypt, and then Rome took over Egypt, beer then moved with that up into the rest of Europe. Now, there may have been independently people figuring out how to make beer along the way, but in a lot of sub-Saharan African villages, brewing is still communal, and people still, the village elders will sit around, they'll have a bunch of long straws, just like a hookah, and they'll sit around drinking beer. I've drunk beer communally in huts, in townships in South Africa. I mean, every African community, it was like you had a central place that you might have a hearth where everybody made their own dough, but they brought it to a central oven. and you always had a brewery, and it was part of everyday domestic life. Well, I came to Brooklyn Brewery in 1994, and I'd known the founders of Brooklyn Brewery for a long time, Steve Hindy and Tom Potter. We'd both been on the home brewing scene. They'd gone into brewing earlier than I did, 88 into 89, so maybe a year before I did. But at the time, all the brewing was being done north of the city, up in Utica. So they're really, even though we wanted to work together and we liked each other, I was brewing every day down at Manhattan Brewing Company, and they were still doing their thing up there and building the brand down here. When it came time for them to actually build the brewery here in Brooklyn, they got in touch with me and said, well, come on over here. I had other plans at the time, but eventually they convinced me something about a boat that I was going to get. I don't know, I still don't have this boat, you know, but they convinced me to come over here. And I actually brought my business partners that I was going to go into business with, brought them into Brooklyn Brewery, you know, and joined as brewmaster and partner in '94, and then set about building this shortly thereafter. Well, it's been pretty amazing. I mean, when I joined the brewery, we made 2 beers, Brooklyn Lager and Brooklyn Brown Ale. My first jobs were actually to reformulate those and kind of you know, get those into good shape. And then I started to bring out new beers, even before we built this, up at the other facility, started to formulate new things. The first thing was Black Chocolate Stout back in 1994, then East India Pale Ale in 1995, then we built this in 1996 and started to bring out other things. And now, on a yearly basis, we make about 16 or 17 different beers every year, as opposed to 2. So we have a lot more variety. We always started off from an international basis, if you like. I coming out of my year overseas and then traveling back there a lot. Steve Hindy, who's the founder, having spent his time in the Middle East as a reporter, and that's really where beer came to him, because all the reporters, when you were working in countries where you couldn't get any beer, they made their own beer so they could have some. So, you know, he fell in love with that while doing that. So there was always an international side, and by 1990 we were already selling beer in Japan. Today, Brooklyn Brewery sells beer in 15 countries. You know, we're the number 2 or number 3, somewhere in there, draft line in New York City itself. But we're actually a pretty small company. We make a bit over 100,000 barrels a year, which is maybe, you know, 1.3 million cases. But to give you some idea, we're in the top 20 breweries in the United States, but Sam Adams is about 25 times our size, and then Anheuser-Busch InBev is 200 times their size. Well, after losing your mind, you know, because you probably will leave something which actually paid money to go do something which, at least for your first bunch of years, won't. It's like it's like going to work in the kitchen. But then again, you will be very popular, you know, among everybody. You know, I have 4,000 some odd Facebook friends, you know, and you know, I don't think it's all about my personality. You know, as much as I think I'm fun to be with, I think it might have something to do with making beer. And it's a real blend between art and science, you know, which is what keeps it very interesting. And what actually I think ties it into filmmaking. I think filmmaking is a blend of art and science. You have to have technical ability, and once you have the technical ability, though, to really do something, you have to have something to say. You know, you can write music, but can you play the guitar? Can you actually do it? You know, there is something technical to it, and it's not just a skill. So, you know, I have to have something to say in this beer. I have to have creative ideas, but I also have to have the scientific background to run all of these organic chemical processes, to manage fermentation, to understand what's going on when we're running the brew house. And that means that on a day-to-day basis, you know, things are generally pretty fascinating. You know, most days are cool, some days are better than others, like any other job, but it's almost never boring.